I'd always yearned for a simple, ordinary family. Growing up in foster care, I was all alone in the world. I had foster parents as a child, but no blood ties. I wanted a family of my own, a perfect family with a loving husband, adorable children, and me. So, when a kind-hearted man proposed to me, I was overjoyed. With this man, I thought, I could build that ordinary family I'd always dreamed of. But in believing so, I was the world's biggest fool. My husband, George, callously ordered me around after I came home from a long day at work. "Hannah, make dinner now! Mom and Emily are starving." Barely 2 seconds in the door, and he's commanding me to make dinner. George, my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, none of them ever think of cooking. My name is Hannah, and I'm stuck with this terrible family. At 29, I work for a large corporation. George, my husband, was a co-worker. I met at the same company. George is 30 years old, but since he couldn't get into college right after graduating high school, we graduated college at the same year. First of all, I have to mention that George is currently unemployed. He had a dispute with his boss in the sales department and quit his job. George was angry that his boss was cold-hearted, but I knew otherwise. Even though George and I were married, we worked in the same company but in different departments. I work in the general affairs department handling office work. My dedication and hard work were trusted and respected by my colleagues. It was during this time that the sales department manager where George worked came to me for advice. As I nervously asked him what was the matter, he opened his mouth tiredly. "Today, your husband suddenly handed in his resignation. Were you aware of this?" Shocked by the manager's hesitant question, I shook my head. "I wasn't told anything. Did something happen?" In response to my visible confusion, having truly not been consulted about anything, the manager explained the situation. "I want to respect my workers' personal lives as much as I can, but..." According to the sales manager, George would casually leave work even if his tasks were not finished. Moreover, he would forcefully dump his overtime work on his timid colleagues. When the manager confronted him about this, he lashed out in anger. George had falsely claimed that we shared housework since we both worked. Furthermore, he stubbornly insisted on leaving work on time, stating that he was worried about his frail mother and sister. When he used his family situation as an excuse, the management could not be strict with him. However, a colleague who had been burdened with George's work complained of mental and physical stress and wanted to resign. The manager advised George that if he prioritizes his family, he should finish his work on his own. George, angry that his argument was not accepted, quit his job on his own accord. To be frank, I'm relieved that he quit. While being considerate of my feelings, the sales manager expressed his honest thoughts. George was arrogant and burdened others despite his incompetency. When his boss pointed this out, he would react angrily without reflecting on his behavior. From what I hear, George was nothing but a liability to the sales department. Feeling guilty, I apologized profusely. "I'm deeply sorry for the trouble caused to everyone in the sales department." The kind sales department manager reassured me that it was not my fault, and he was disgusted by George, who had quit his job on a whim without consulting his wife. "Just to confirm, is he really doing housework? And are your family members sick?" "All his claims are false. I do all the housework, and my mother-in-law and sister-in-law are healthy." Upon hearing my testimony, the manager sympathized sincerely, saying, "I see. That's tough." And that's how my husband George ended up unemployed. He believed that he would get a new job right away, but the real world is harsh. Despite his job hunting efforts, he kept facing rejections. George is resentful on his previous boss, believing that he had bad-mouthed him to other companies. I can swear that my company does not engage in such practices. Even after submitting a resignation, it is common knowledge among working people to stay in the company for at least a month. There are matters like work handover and procedures to be dealt with. However, George slammed his resignation letter onto the manager's desk and went home the same day. It was obvious to me that such an unreasonable person would not be hired by any company. George was content with giving his small severance pay to his mother and sister. He was raised in a single-parent family with his mother and sister, Emily. Their father divorced his mother and left, which seems to have been a wise decision. Both my mother-in-law and Emily are healthy and capable of working, but they do nothing. I pay for our living expenses and do all the work. Whenever I ask George to help out at home, he yells at me. "My mother and Emily are my precious family. You're my wife, so you should be devoted to helping us out." It made no sense to me, so I snapped back at him. "Forget about your mother, but Emily is 23 years old. At least let her get a part-time job." George adored Emily a lot, who was 7 years younger than him. Emily was also taking advantage of George's kindness, pleading for pocket money. As I firmly refused to give her money, George started working part-time. It was a job managing a warehouse for a courier service. George tells people around him that he quit his job at a major corporation because his family was sick. He is a man who lies as he breathes, just to keep his reputation. And so, George's part-time earnings became Emily's dating expenses. Not doing any housework or work, Emily started going out with men. I was fed up with my mother-in-law stealing bills from my wallet out of her greed for money. Even if I talked to George about it, he would get mad at me. "Take care of my mom if you're my wife. This is why I can't stand people who grew up all alone in foster care like you." My mother-in-law scoffed at me, calling me, "Hannah, you're so wicked." I was living my days with the worst family. But one day, an encounter that changed my depressing daily life arrived. When I came home after buying groceries after work, there were unfamiliar shoes at the entrance. They were large-sized men's sneakers. I thought we had a guest over, since the shoes were larger than George's. Then, a young man popped out. He was tall, had a handsome face, and his hair was light brown. When I thought Emily had brought her boyfriend, the man apologized. "I'm very sorry. I was on the verge of dating Emily, but I'll take it back." Contrary to his frivolous appearance, his tone was polite. A wise young man making sound judgments. I spontaneously asked the young man who was about to leave with his sneakers on, "What's your name?" "I'm Emily's sister-in-law, Hannah." When I introduced myself, the young man looked up and smiled a little. He looked like a player, but he had a smart expression. The man introduced himself after he finished putting on his sneakers. "I'm James. I work as a bartender. Emily was a regular at the bar I work." According to him, Emily confessed to him and he was about to accept, but he declined. The reason was that Emily showed her true nature and spilled everything because of alcohol. "All my money is all from George's part-time job. My sister-in-law is stingy and ugly. She makes me work and do housework." James deeply regretted that he was inexperienced and couldn't spot a good woman because of that. But he's a kind-hearted person who couldn't leave drunk Emily alone and send her home. Moreover, James paid for the taxi fare. Just at such times, both George and my mother-in-law were not at home. So, James got our house key from Emily, who was wasted, and carried her to our living room. "I couldn't leave her at the entrance. I swear I didn't steal anything, ma'am." He seemed to be studying at a vocational school during the day and working as an apprentice bartender at night. He was called out by Emily after school. Emily lied about being a worker at a clothing store. James didn't see through Emily's lies and noticed her true nature at the last moment. He may look like a player, but he was a serious and sincere young man. His flashy light brown hair was his natural hair color. "I'm mixed. This is the business card for the bar I worked at. Sorry for the trouble." He's running late, but he said he's ready to work now. "I see. Thank you for bringing Emily home. Have a great shift." When I said that, James went home with a smile. Normally, I would report a young man who was at home without permission and had a connection with Emily. But I intuitively thought that James was a trustworthy person with good nature. It was a silver lining that he hadn't been deceived by Emily. When I entered the living room, Emily was indeed drunk and asleep. She was an annoyance, but to avoid dealing with a potential cold, I covered her with a blanket. Suddenly, Emily woke up and opened her mouth, unable to pronounce her words exactly. "Hey, where's James? My boyfriend with brown hair. So handsome." Emily laughed boastfully, checked her phone, and let out a scream. James had verbally told her he couldn't date her, but it was in vain. Emily was too drunk to understand James's intentions, but clever James had politely declined through a text. Emily had no recollection of revealing her true nature. She's crying and angry, feeling like James had abandoned her. "What's wrong about me? I've been deceived." The one who deceived James was Emily, but it was unfortunate for James as well. As I ignored the commotion and started cooking dinner, George and my mother-in-law came home. And upon hearing Emily's side of the story, George became furious. "Did he mess with you, Emily? Where does he work at? I'll punch him for you." "We're going to demand damages. Poor Emily." Indeed, Emily is foolish and pitiful, but it's completely due to her own resentment. As I was worried about causing trouble for James, Emily glared at me. "Hannah, did you say something to James?" She showed me the text on her phone, causing me to gasp. The message read, "I can't date a liar." Emily had drunkenly revealed everything, but she thought I was the one who tattled. George and mother-in-law also confronted me, so I explained the truth of my encounter with James at the entrance. He was trying to take care of Emily and was about to leave the house when we ran into each other. That's all. I asserted that I hadn't said anything unnecessary to him. George clicked his tongue and turned his face away from me.
Emily, let's eat sushi today. It's premium sushi.
George decided to order sushi delivery on his own, and he started eating the premium sushi with my mother-in-law and Emily all on my tab, without touching any of the dinner I had prepared. As I sat eating the dinner I had prepared alone, the three of them were laughing.
Eating sushi as a family is the best. It makes up for the usual terrible cooking.
Really? It's so delicious. It compensates for the usual bad food. George also agreed and laughed along with my mother-in-law. While enduring their mockery, I felt more emptiness. Is this the family I wanted when I got married? How stupid. Suddenly, the face of my only family member with whom I had become estranged after marriage floated in my mind. And for some reason, I recalled James's kind smile and was parted. A turning point for me arrived several days later. While cleaning the house on my day off, George brought me a bank book. Seeing the deposit notification, I panicked. The bank book recorded the savings I had carefully accumulated before our marriage. George showed me the cash card and seal with a triumphant look.
I'm giving the $100,000 you saved to my parents and sister. If you refuse, we divorce.
This was the money I had been saving for the future expenses of our child. I thought that if we had a child, George might keep a distance from his mother and Emily. But George completely denied my dreams, saying,
I care about my mother and sister more than our kid.
Do as you like. I had hoped to build a happy and ordinary family, but it seemed impossible. I showed George the divorce papers that I had prepared for him. If you accept this, we're getting a divorce. It's over between us. George joyfully filled in the necessary information on the divorce papers and handed them back. That was the end of things with him. Ignoring George, who was elated over $100,000, I packed my bags. Then, I left the house and submitted the divorce papers, which got registered just fine. I, having divorced George, had returned to my adoptive father's house. My adoptive father is often absent due to work, so essentially, I live alone. When I left home, I called my adoptive father. Hannah, come back to your family home. I, who had been rebelling against my adoptive father since adolescence, felt like crying. Despite our strained relationship, my adoptive father forgave me, who used to be so ungrateful. Living quietly at home, memories from my childhood came back to me. The fact that I was taken from the orphanage to my adoptive father's house. At that time, I had an adoptive mother who loved me as if I were her own daughter. That adoptive mother passed away from illness when I was in junior high school. Since then, I had been rebelling against my adoptive father. I was lonely because my adoptive father was often absent due to work. But now that I think about it, both my adoptive father and the late adoptive mother cared for me. I was fixated on a normal family and had forgotten the love of those close to me. I'm divorced now. I'm having a huge burden lifted off my shoulders. With the load off my shoulders, I was now working hard. That's when I ran into James again. When I was about to leave work, I ran into the sales department manager in the elevator hall. When I started to say, "Good job today," the manager kindly spoke to me. "You've been through a lot.
You look better than before, and I'm so happy for you."
The manager knew about my divorce with George. He sincerely praised me for holding up well. As I bowed and got into the elevator, the manager spoke in a serious tone.
"There's a bar that's been talked about in the sales department. I want to go, but it's a bit too fancy for an old man like me."
I heard that the manager has a wife and children who is in high school. What kind of place is it? A cafe or something?
Then the manager pleaded with me. "It's a bar. I don't drink, but I'm fascinated by bars."
So, he humbly asked me to accompany him. I know the manager is a sincere person, so I decided to accompany him to the bar. The bar, recommended by the manager's workers, was a hidden gem in the basement. The manager said,
"Don't be nervous,"
as he opened the door to the shop. The interior was truly chic, the kind of decor that young people would like. I followed the manager into the shop, but was shocked when I looked at the bar counter. James? The bartender was James, whom I had bumped into before the divorce. He was a bit surprised too, but quickly smiled.
"Welcome. It's been a long time, Hannah."
The flashy and handsome bartender's words made the manager raise his voice.
"Do you know each other? The women in my department have been talking about a very handsome man working here. He looks like an actor."
As the manager laughed, James seemed embarrassed.
"Not at all. I'm just an apprentice bartender."
"What would you like to order?" I'm not used to bars, so I ordered what James recommended. The manager ordered a non-alcoholic cocktail. The bar was quiet and the clientele were refined. James's father was set to be the owner.
At first, I rebelled and went to college, but I ended up being inspired by my father's work.
James prepped a cocktail and I announced that I had divorced. As I was drinking the clear blue cocktail, the boss was unusually furious.
"That woman's ex-husband is outrageous. I should not have given him a retirement allowance."
"Boss, did you get drunk on a non-alcoholic drink?" James prepared a mint soda, smiling at me who was forcing a smile. He offered the mint soda to the boss for free. The boss calmed down a bit and asked while drinking mint soda,
"Hey, mister, do you send drinks from other customers? Like in dramas?"
James laughed cheerfully at the boss who was asking seriously.
I've never done it. Urban legend, perhaps?"
I was having a pleasant time at the bar when suddenly my phone rang. I was about to step outside, but James told me it was okay to answer the call here. Upon confirming who it was George, my ex-husband whom I had divorced. I was annoyed by the interruption of the fun gathering, but I answered because the calls were persistent. Before I could ask the purpose of the call, George complained loudly.
"I can't withdraw money. Your balance is 0.
Of course, that's after I transferred the deposit to another account. Think about it. Would anyone keep a passbook with $100,000 deposit in a house where those 3 greedy people live? It is for sure that it would be stolen, so I had to take measures in advance. The passbook George stole from me was a dummy. The real one was carefully hidden by me. That's why I still have the $100,000. When I told him, George was dumbfounded. He, my former mother-in-law, and Emily were having a luxurious time overseas. They gambled, and as their funds started to run out, they tried to dip into my $100,000. However, they couldn't withdraw the money and were so distressed, they called me. George threatened me to send all my assets immediately. I refused. I handed over the passbook obediently. I also gave up the house in the property division.
I coldly declared that I no longer knew anything about it. In the meantime, James asked me to lend him my phone. In front of me and the boss, he ruthlessly demanded George.
There is a tab of 3,000 of your sister's drinks. I'm sorry, but please pay.
After saying only that, James returned my phone to me. So work hard for your beloved mother and sister, big brother. George cried for help, but I hung up the call. When I apologized for making a fuss, James offered me a cocktail with a smile. It's on me. And a ginger ale for the boss.
Let's toast the refreshing turn of events.
James, the boss, and I toasted to George's miserable fate. From then on, George really fell into a hell of debt. When he was at a loss in a hotel overseas, a kind gentleman approached him. The gentleman was a president in finance and offered to lend him money if George was in trouble. George, who was in dire need of money, jumped at it without thinking about the interest. As a result, his debt ballooned to $500,000 and he was in a crisis. The kind gentleman even prepared a job for him to repay the loan. Now, it seems George is working on a fishing boat. Nobody knows where is at now. Emily and my mother-in-law had an obligation to repay, working from morning till night, except for sleeping. They sold their house and now live in a small apartment. I was living as usual at my parents' home. Today, unusually, my foster father was also there, so we were chatting. You're well prepared, pitching my ex-husband to the deep end. The one who lent money to George and effectively sent him to a debt trap was my foster father. He was a known figure in the financial industry, well-connected in various fields. George was on a family trip abroad with my parting gift. It was impossible with George's part-time job salary, but he sold all of my jewelry. George was ecstatic because he got a lot of money. He was having a blast overseas with that money. When I got married, my foster father told me to protect this one thing. He strictly ordered that when I divorce, I should leave the jewelry and the house. I'm always amazed at your audacity, Dad. My foster father had connections with the precious metal buyer that George used. He had information that George, who sold my jewelry, was going overseas. You show up just in time in front of George and you see through everything. I have sources. I also know you're getting along with the young bartender. I nearly spit out my tea laughing at what he said. After George's uproar, the manager took a liking to James, so he brought other colleagues along to the bar. That's when my boss said to James,
James, do you have someone you're interested in here? Be honest.
Directed by my manager's leading question, he looked at me while explaining. 23-year-old James had one-sided feelings for me. He seemed to have liked me since we met. James was self-deprecating about being immature and not being good enough for me. But the manager was adamant.
James, you're a great guy. His looks and personality? Go and tell her your feelings.
I tried to stop the manager's momentum, but I got confessed by James. I like you, Hannah. If you're okay with someone as inexperienced as me, let's get together. Wait, I'm 29 years old. I'm 6 years older than you. And I'm divorced too. That's not a problem. I like you, Hannah. In such a turn of events, I now have a 23-year-old boyfriend. My manager was overjoyed, saying, I'm your wingman. I was thinking of telling my foster father later, but he found out.
I went to James' bar. He's a very nice young man. He's different from your ex-husband, who would berate you.
Dad, you're moving too fast. My foster father has always been a worrier when it comes to me. Although he is an extreme person who can do so much to George, who disrespected me, he is a kind father. I am more than happy to be this man's daughter. Thank you, Dad. When I told my foster father my feelings with a smile, he smiled back. Next time I take a break, I thought I'd go to the hot springs with my dear foster father. James will also be coming with us. I promised to marry him. Next time, James is going to greet my foster father. I'm sure my father and James will make a good family. I reported to my father with a smile that I was going to start a new family. My father smiled and said, "Congratulations, Hannah."
All right then. If you're going to belittle me like that, you can forget about seeing your grandchild.
The son, who had been incessantly asking his parents for financial support, sneered with a smirk that suggested victory.
Sorry to burst your bubble, but I am cut above my sister here. I have a steady income, and I don't need Mom to bail me out anymore. If you want to cut ties, feel free.
We won't be showing you our kid, even when we have one. Please keep your distance from our lives.
And don't think about crying to us about your retirement expenses, because we won't pay a dime.
Having had their say, the two left. In the end, just as my daughter predicted, all they wanted was to leech off of me and live a luxurious life. They even stooped so low as to exploit a parent's longing to see their grandchild. I won't let them manipulate me anymore. My name is Mary. I'm turning 54 this year. After having 2 kids, I divorced their father and managed to scrape by on the child support payments he provided. Thankfully, I was able to return to my previous job, which allowed me to make ends meet while putting a bit aside. I've tried to compensate for the absence of their father, but I was perhaps a bit naive in my approach. The wake-up call came when my son got married.
Mom, could you help out again this month?
Well, I guess I don't have much choice. My eldest son, David, got married to his high school sweetheart, Linda, about 6 months ago. They rented an apartment near my house, saying they were saving up to buy their own place. I even contributed significantly to their wedding expenses, all in support of their goals. Still, David would make requests for money with a humble gesture, a plea to me, his mother. He'd talk about how his company was struggling, how his salary and bonuses were stagnating. He'd explain how Linda's parents were unwell and he had to send them money. All kinds of hardships were shared with me. The more I listened, the more I felt he was being a bit naive about his role as the family breadwinner. Nevertheless, I continued to give him money for about 6 months after their marriage. Since we lived nearby, they would often come over. We'd frequently share dinners, and I assumed David was bringing Linda over to my place. Despite being newlyweds, they seemed to prefer spending time with me rather than themselves. I even hinted at this once, but Linda only responded with, "Your cooking is so good. Mary, I could eat it every day." Although I was flattered, Linda never showed any interest in learning my recipes or helping me cook. The years passed in this way until my daughter, Trisha, started applying to colleges. At that crucial time, I asked David and Linda to refrain from visiting so frequently. Yet,
They continued to ask for financial support, and once the college applications were over, they were back to their usual frequent visits. Around that time, Trisha and Linda started having disagreements. "Mary, your financial help has really saved us. The economy is so tough, and David's company isn't doing well." "But that bag you're carrying, Linda, it's designer, isn't it? You seem to be doing pretty well for yourself."
"Come on, Trisha, this isn't that expensive."
"Besides, you always butter up Mom for money. And Linda, don't you ever think of getting a part-time job or something?"
Trisha, that's rude.
"Who's being rude here? Don't you feel ashamed relying on your parents for money?"
Well, I do feel sorry for Linda because I'm not earning enough."
"No, not to Linda, to Mom."
"It's all right, Trisha, let's cool it. We're all going through a tough time. Let's be understanding."
It wasn't the first or second time Mary had to mediate between her children like this during meals. I understood Trisha's complaints, but I believed they just needed to endure a bit longer. Mary trusted they would soon say they could stand on their own feet and wouldn't need any more financial support. Above all, she didn't want to burden her children with money issues, especially without a father figure around. These were some of the thoughts running through Mary's head. As Mary finished dinner and started cleaning up, she heard Linda from behind.
Excuse me."
Mary turned around with a smile, thinking that the moment I had anticipated had arrived. Linda's words froze my smile.
"Thank you so much for your support, Mom. It's really a big help."
"It's okay. I'm sorry Trisha can be a bit of a nag."
"Don't worry about it. But I have a favor to ask."
"What is it?"
"Recently, I've been thinking about having a child, but I'm not confident about the finances."
"What?"
"Well, it's hard to have a baby when you're older, isn't it?"
"Well, I guess it might be.
So I was wondering if you could increase the amount of support money a little more."
Shockingly, David and Linda weren't just content with walking on their own feet. They were actually planning on having a child in this situation. How can they consider having a child when their financial outlook was so unstable? I thought. So I tried to hint them that it was reckless. Yet, Linda seemed irked and countered.
"Don't you want to see your grandchild?"
"I'm not saying I don't want to."
"Exactly. I'm an only child and I really want my parents to meet their grandchild as soon as possible."
"But you do realize that having a child will make things even more difficult."
"I'll start working too then. We'll manage. David has also reassured me about this."
Despite my advice, Linda insisted that everything would be fine and there was nothing to worry about. As a result, I ended up increasing my monthly allowance to them from $1,000 to $1,200. When I told Trisha about this, she was indignant, insisting,
"Mom, you're definitely being duped by them."
But I still dreamed of the day when the two would become independent. A few years after I increased the allowance, David came to our house alone. Apparently, he knew I was off from work that day and seemed anxious to discuss something with me.
Is Trisha here?
"I think she's studying in her room. Why? Do you need something?"
No, it's okay. I just have something to ask of you, Mom.
"I hope it's not bad news."
Well, I was wondering if you could increase the allowance a little more.
I had kind of expected it from David's demeanor, but I was utterly disappointed that both he and Linda
just kept asking for money with no remorse. I let out a heavy sigh and finally, in a loud voice, reprimanded David. "Enough is enough! How long do you plan on relying on your parents?"
No, you're misunderstanding. Linda has been getting tests done at the hospital.
Hospital? Is Linda sick?
No, not like that. She's been getting tests done for childbirth, and it's turning out to be more expensive than we thought. We're short on cash.
That's why I told you. It's not a good idea to have a child without proper planning. What will you do if something unexpected happens? If the child gets injured or if one of you falls ill? You can't just say, "We don't have money." You don't think everything will be fine just by begging me, do you?
Don't get so angry. I didn't know the tests were going to be so expensive.
Isn't that odd? I turned around at the sound of the sudden interjection to find Tricia, who had seemingly been in the living room for a while. David made a sour face, trying to shoo her away, but Tricia stopped him from saying anything and approached him.
What kind of tests are you talking about for childbirth? If she's pregnant, can't you check it with a pregnancy test? What test is it?
I don't know. Linda went alone. I just heard we don't have enough money.
Why did you let Linda go to the hospital alone for such a serious matter as childbirth? Normally, couples go together to listen to the doctor, don't they? David, you have the day off today, right?
Don't butt in. You're just a kid who knows nothing about pregnancy.
The one who doesn't understand what even a kid does is you, David.
There was some arguing, but David couldn't refuse Tricia's points and reluctantly left.
While I thought Tricia had a point, I told her, "Isn't it okay to cut them some slack considering their situation?" To which she sighed at me. "Mom, are you serious?" "What do you mean?"
"They just want money. Their reasons are surely fabricated."
"Why would you say that?" Unable to hold herself back, Tricia went back to her room and returned with her smartphone. She showed me several pictures. It was Linda's bag.
Linda claimed it's a cheap one, but I think it's real. She made fun of my bag, saying it's pathetic, and laughed.
"This bag costs $1,200? That's the same as the monthly allowance."
"Yeah, and it's a high-end brand. And no matter how cheap it is, she had a different bag each time she came over. I think she's just spending the allowance on these kinds of things."
"You might be right. Linda did have a lot of different bags."
"She was laughing behind your back, calling you a fool for not noticing. You wouldn't know."
Then Tricia showed me a recording. It was a conversation between Linda and Tricia, recorded when I was at work and Linda had come over to the house.
"Tricia, I know you don't carry anything but cheap bags, and you're not interested in money, right? Could you ask your mom to increase the amount she's sending to me? Didn't you say something like this before and got some money from Mom? Just an additional $200 isn't enough. It's $1,200, okay? She thinks she's taking care of her son and his dreams for just $1,200? She could at least give us more, since she might get to see her grandchild."
How audacious!
Don't you understand it's better for the world if young people spend the money instead of the old hoarding it?
"Hey, Mom. Are you still going to keep sending them money after they said all this?" Her voice unmistakably clear.
Tricia had secretly recorded their conversation on her phone that was stashed in her pocket.
Upon hearing it, I felt both disappointed and deeply sorry for Tricia. She had been exposed to her brother and his wife begging their own mother for money. It was a wake-up call. I resolved to have a serious talk with David and Linda. "I need to talk with David and Linda. I'm glad. If you're gonna do that, I'll help you however much I can. Thank you. The next day, I invited the two of them to my house. Linda arrived, one of those $1,200 bags in her hand, her face beaming with delight. Trisha and I sat down with them at the living room table. I'm going to stop sending you money.
What? What are you talking about? We can't handle this kind of surprise.
That's right, mother-in-law. My medical expenses are piling up, and it's really causing me trouble.
Why don't you just save your money instead of buying those expensive bags? Linda, who initially tried to be humble and gain my favor, sighed heavily as if she had been wronged when I mentioned the bag.
Don't you want to see your grandchild?
I would feel sorry for the child being born to such an irresponsible parent.
Are you saying that even though your son is in trouble, you're not gonna help us?
I've been helping you enough. I've been sending you money for 10 years now. David, you should stop this already.
It was you. You must have said something to Mom.
Trisha has nothing to do with this. It's my decision based on your behavior. As I firmly stated this, David and Linda fell silent. Seeing this, I felt relieved that we could end this after a decent conversation. But then, David laughed in a mocking tone and started shouting at us.
Well, fine. If you're going to insult me like this, then give up on ever seeing your grandchild.
What are you talking about? Weren't you the one who was disrespecting Mom? You kept sending me money because you thought I was useless, right?
That's right. You kept paying us because you thought David was struggling, right?
What are you trying to say?
Sorry to break it to you, but unlike you, I'm actually competent. I've been earning my own money, so I don't need Mom's help. Feel free to stop giving us your petty cash.
You're blaming us, but you're just saying you can't go on without the money, right?
Yeah, that's right, but don't come crying to us for money from your old age expenses after showing us this attitude.
And even if we do have a child, we won't be showing you the baby's face. Never interfere with us again.
With these words, they left with a bang. As it turned out, Trisha was right. They were simply trying to bleed me dry and squander the money. Worse, they exploited my desire to see my grandchild. Trisha was grinning with satisfaction as I sank into my thoughts. Don't worry, they'll be back begging in no time. But from now on, it's a new game, Mom. Trisha spoke with certainty. And she was right. Just half a year later, David, still in his work clothes, showed up at the house clutching his credit card statement. Listen to me, Mom. Linda's out there, spending my money on bags and wallets like it's nothing.
Oh, why are you surprised now?
That's cold, Mom.
Well, didn't she always behave like that? Even when she was receiving $1,200 from me each month.
$1,200? She said she was only getting $500.
You didn't even know how much allowance I was giving to your wife, did you?
That's disappointing. Indeed, I used to put the money in an envelope and give it to the two of them. I felt a headache coming on at my son's pathetic ignorance, not even checking the amount before using it.
She's spending that $1,200 on all sorts of useless things, and our savings are depleting rapidly.
That's how it's always been. I don't understand why you didn't realize it sooner. Mary replied, her words also serving as a critique of her past self. Perhaps by being in the same position now, David might understand a bit of how I felt. But ultimately, David couldn't stop Linda, and he would only rely on me for money. There was nothing I could do for my son, who complained and lashed out without a hint of apology. It seemed that their quarrelsome days continued. Unable to stop Linda from spending more than her income. It was no surprise, considering they were unable to save, even though they were receiving $1,200 a month for free. As I observed their poor financial management, I couldn't help but wonder where I went wrong in raising them. I just kept going, doing as Trisha told me to.
"Mom, I didn't know you moved,"
was the message I received about 10 days after the move. Trisha had anticipated that David and Linda would come asking for money again. And so, as a precaution, we sold our house and moved to an apartment with easy access to Trisha's workplace. Of course, we didn't tell the two of them our new address. Just as Trisha had predicted, they came to our old place and, finding us gone, sent a frantic mail. I received a flurry of apologetic mails from David, mixed with preaching about how he wouldn't care about my old age or his children's future. If they're this desperate, I wonder if they have also been rude to Linda's parents.
That's not likely. Linda's parents are just like her, always asking for handouts, Trisha told me, sharing some information she'd learned about Linda's family. From the $1,200 I used to give her, it seemed Linda had also been passing on some money to her parents. It finally made sense how they could spend so much each month. And now, with their disposable income finally gone, it seemed that David and Linda were being pressed for money by Linda's parents. I was speechless at how my son and daughter-in-law could still think of relying on others after all they had gone through. Seeing the emails I'd received, Trisha laughed and said, "I told you so," before promptly blocking them. I felt neither sympathy nor pity for David and Linda, even if they apologized. After all, they were so proud of their good income and qualifications, so they should work hard together. I've caused Trisha enough trouble over David. I've been helping him out, even dipping into my savings while working. But I have done enough. From now on, until Trisha finds a good partner, we'll support each other as mother and daughter.
You didn't have to get so angry about it. It was just a misunderstanding about the child.
I was beyond angry and appalled that my husband could seriously say such a thing. I wondered how I could make him understand. As I was contemplating my response, I heard a voice from the seat behind us. "Hey, can you believe that? This guy is the worst. I don't even want to breathe the same air as him." As I turned around, I saw a young couple. My husband, realizing they were talking about him, stood up. The girl stared straight at him and began to speak again. "My name is Linda. I'm a 28-year-old homemaker. This is the 3rd year of my marriage to my husband, Robert. Even after 2 years of marriage, I couldn't get pregnant, but around the time we were discussing visiting a gynecologist next month, I found out that we were pregnant. During my pregnancy, my husband Robert took excessive care of me. Not only did he carry heavy things for me, but he also accompanied me whenever I went out. He read parenting magazines, suggesting which diapers were best, and promised to take care of any nighttime crying. My mother-in-law was also very kind. 2 years ago, when my mother passed away, she worried about me because I chose not to go back to my hometown, so she also tried to help me in any way she could. I was filled with happiness. thinking that they would love our child even more once he or she was born. However, reality would betray my expectations. The day I went into labor, I contacted Robert immediately since he was at work. Even though he claimed to be in a slow season, he didn't respond at all. This was the first time something like this had happened, so I endured the pain, filled with anxiety. About 6 hours later, I gave birth to a baby girl, but there was still no contact from Robert, and I was worried that he might have been in an accident. I told a nurse about this and she contacted my mother-in-law for me. She said she would come right away, so I was anxiously waiting. My mother-in-law arrived at the hospital room within about 20 minutes, and behind her was Robert, whom we hadn't been able to reach. I remembered having contacted him, but he was supposed to come the next day. Confused, I asked Robert, "Robert, where have you been? Didn't you see my messages? You know, I wanted you to be present at the birth. I was worried you might have had an accident." Robert frowned at my words and looked away as if he was uncomfortable. Unable to understand his attitude, I could only tilt my head in confusion. Seeing Robert not even looking at our child sleeping peacefully beside me, I started to feel anxious. Then, my mother-in-law, glaring at me, shouted out, "How dare you deceive us all this time?" "Huh? Deceive? What are you talking about, Mom?" My mother-in-law's face turned red. Robert, as always, frowned and looked away. "My son Robert is sterile. This baby is not his. You had an affair and now you're trying to make Robert raise that child?" "What? Wait a minute, sterile? Just to be clear, I never cheated on my husband, so our daughter is truly, without a doubt, his child."
You know, I would have been happy with just the two of us, he said, struggling to get the words out. "But you wanted a child. I thought that if I could accept that child, everything would be alright. But in the end, I just couldn't stand it."
My husband, he poured out his heart like that. On hearing this, my mother-in-law became even more incensed. "How dare you betray my kind-hearted son? He confessed everything to me yesterday. You're getting a divorce and we will be seeking alimony." "Wait, a divorce? Hold on. This must be a mistake. I didn't cheat. If need be, I'm willing to have a DNA test done on our daughter and Robert." Before I could finish, the hospital room door burst open with a loud bang. Startled, I turned to see my father standing there. He stormed over to me and in a fit of rage, slapped me across the face. "You disgrace! You betrayed your husband by having an affair. I'm cutting all ties with you and you are not getting any inheritance." "Ouch, Dad, wait! I didn't cheat." But he cut me off, slapping me again. The pain in my cheek throbbed, and tears welled up in my eyes. My mother-in-law, my husband, and now my father, they all scorned me. I desperately denied the accusations, but no one believed me. Just as I was about to utter the word divorce, the door swung open again. "Excuse me," a nurse entered the room. "I'm sorry, but we asked for quiet in the hospital. I don't know the circumstances, but new mothers are quite sensitive. This could lead to postpartum depression, so please refrain from discussing such matters." "What are you talking about barging in here like that? This has nothing to do with postpartum depression." To my mother-in-law's protest, the nurse smiled and responded, "Well, if anything were to happen because of this, part of our job is to ensure the safety of our patients. I hate to intrude, but I'll have to ask you to leave." My mother-in-law grumbled and left, seemingly overpowered by the nurse's insistence. My husband and father also left the room, and finally tranquility returned. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause trouble." "Don't worry about it. Our job is to protect the mother. Besides, I know for a fact that you, Linda, wouldn't have an affair." The nurse called me by my name, and I looked at her. I must have met her somewhere before, but still not able to place her, she smiled at me. "I have lost a lot of weight since then, so I can understand if you don't recognize me. Remember, we went to high school together. Mary, do you remember?" "Mary? No way! Is it really you? At the familiar name, I was taken aback. Mary was a friend from high school, a quiet and gentle girl. Before she joined our friend group, she was teased about her figure by some other girls. I don't remember how it happened, but she started spending time with us. We shared a love for cartoons and comics, talking about it every day. However, I never would have guessed that the slender, beautiful woman in front of me was the same person. I can't believe it. You moved away so suddenly and we lost contact. I have been worried. I'm sorry, my parents divorced and I had to cancel my cell phone. My mom's family is from here, so I moved hastily. I see. I'm glad you seem to be doing well. Thanks for everything earlier. When they said those things to me, I didn't know what to do. Mary hugged me and stroked my head. It felt comforting, just like when my mother, who passed away 2 years ago, used to do. I'll explain to the ward nurses to make sure they can visit. Right now, you need to rest your exhausted body after giving birth. It's important for the baby too, right? I sighed in relief at Mary's words. But I have nowhere else to go after I'm discharged from the hospital, except for that house. Seeing my gloomy face, Mary made a proposal. Actually, I live still at my mom's old house. We have extra rooms. Would you like to come stay with us? What? At your house? I was surprised and raised my voice. Mary was looking at me seriously. That's right, the current situation isn't good for you or your daughter. And if you go back, you'll be blamed by those people and your dad. Divorce is inevitable anyway, so let's fight this together. I can't stand to see you suffer like this. Tears welled up in Mary's eyes. I decided to rely on her, who was seriously considering me and my daughter. I got permission from the doctor and left the hospital half a day early. I told my husband that I would be discharged in the evening, but to be safe, I left from the back entrance and went to Mary's house. You made it. Here's your room. Please, take it easy for at least a month while you recover. Mary's mother showed me to the room. The room was filled with a baby bed and all kinds of baby gear. Let us know if there is anything you need. I cried tears of gratitude for Mary's kindness. After I finished breastfeeding and had a break, Mary's mother started to talk. I have a hunch about this. It's hard to say, but I think your husband is probably cheating. My ex-husband was thinking the same thing back then. Hearing Mary's mother's words, it felt like I had been hit over the head with a blunt object. But at the same time, I couldn't help but agree, because recently, there were many times when I couldn't contact my husband during the day. He works at my father-in-law's company doing sales. It's not a large company, so they were flexible, allowing him to work from home outside of client meetings when I had morning sickness and giving him time off for every prenatal checkup. However, he started telling me he was busy about 6 months ago, and I often went to the checkups alone. Even when I sent him a shopping list during the day, he often didn't read it. I didn't suspect him of cheating because he said he was busy and he was home every night, except when we were invited to my in-laws' house. A private investigator who helped me back then is my relative. He can introduce a lawyer as well. If nothing comes out of the investigation, that's good. But don't you want to know why he suddenly said those things? I nodded at her words. Mary's mother immediately contacted that person and they started the investigation the next day. About 2 weeks later, the information that the detective brought was just as Mary's mother had said. I can't believe this is happening. I burst into tears and Mary held me until I calmed down. The woman my husband cheated on me with was in her early 20s. She seemed to have joined my father-in-law's company half a year ago. She was a stunning beauty and all the men in the office were head over heels for her. Apparently, my husband was no exception. He ended up driving her home from a company-held summer party when she had too much to drink, and that's when their physical relationship started. After that, they would say they were going out for business in a day, but they would be at a hotel or her place doing God knows what. And what surprised me the most was that my mother-in-law knew about this woman and even welcomed her, apparently. She had been hoping for a granddaughter and dreamed of beautiful children when she found out the mistress was young and beautiful. She encouraged them to go on dates during work hours and actively cooperated. She even helped cover for him when he claimed to be on business trips and was actually vacationing or staying overnight with the other woman. The woman was even apparently going to a gynecologist to work on getting pregnant. It was dizzying. What a despicable bunch. Linda did nothing wrong. Mary was trembling with rage next to me, stunned. Linda, what do you want to do? Do you still want to continue this marriage after all this? No, I have woken up to reality. I am going to get him to pay proper damages.
That's right. That's the way to go. We are with you all the way. Don't hold back when you're hurting. Just let it all out. I'll call the attorney now. Let's get ready.
Mary's mother briskly began making preparations. The attorney went through the documents as soon as he arrived.
This is unbelievable. Let's start with a DNA test. We'll clearly demonstrate that you have done nothing wrong.
I nodded in agreement. We incorporated a DNA test into the divorce conditions along with providing proof. The response from my husband was a resounding no. It's obvious if they tested, it would prove his blood relationship with the child. His side was trying to avoid testing, but the attorney didn't relent and the test was performed. It was officially recognized that the child was his, and then I demanded a divorce and damages. Of course, I also claimed damages from the mistress. The mistress had only told her parents she was planning to marry the president's son. When they found out he was already married, they were absolutely livid. After they covered her share of the damages, they apparently threw her into a relative's motel. My husband, the moment the other woman was gone, refused to divorce.
I was fooled. The only one I really love is you.
When he said such clinched lines over the phone, I thought I was going to throw up. The attorney did his best, but the divorce discussions weren't progressing. So as a last resort, we decided to have a meeting with my husband and the attorney. The meeting could have been at the attorney's office, but to avoid any violent outbreaks, we decided on a diner a little ways away from where we live. The moment my husband saw my face, he broke down in tears. It was clear performance and I showed my disgust, but he was too absorbed in his own crying to notice.
Now, about the divorce, why the hell is a stranger pushing the conversation forward?
My husband's scream echoed through the diner. Well, he is my lawyer, isn't he? Don't yell, you're causing a scene in the restaurant. At my words, my husband looked dumbfounded for a moment but quickly broke into a laugh.
Come on, we aren't divorcing, so why need a lawyer? Send him home and let's talk about our future, just the two of us. Come on, stop being stubborn and come back home. Your mother is waiting too. It was just a misunderstanding about the kid. You don't have to get so upset, do you?
I was beyond angry at my husband, who could say such things in earnest. I wondered how I could make him understand. I was thinking of a reply when, "Hey, can you believe it? That guy, he's the worst. I don't want to breathe the same air as him." I turned towards the voice coming from the seat behind us, and there was a young couple. Realizing that they were talking about him, my husband stood up, but the girl just looked at him straight in the eye and said, "How can such a jerk really exist? Hey, promise you won't turn out like him."
Of course, he is not only a failed man, but a failed human being too.
Being ridiculed by someone much younger, my husband's face turned red with anger.
What could you kids possibly know? Adults have their own circumstances. Stay quiet.
How can you deny your wife and child? What kind of circumstances can justify that? I don't understand and I don't want to. The high school girl snapped back at him, and my husband was left speechless. I handed my husband the divorce papers and documents detailing alimony and child support. There is no point talking to you anymore. If you won't sign this here, shall we meet in court?
Court? Wait a minute. Don't talk like that. If this goes to court, it could affect my father's company's reputation.
The company of the man I'm divorcing is no longer of my concern. Hearing my words, my husband sank to the ground. He signed the papers in front of him and stumbled out of the restaurant. Afterwards, I submitted the divorce papers and was granted a divorce. I received a lump sum for child support and alimony, which helped cover my immediate expenses. As I was looking for a rental using that money, I was stopped by Mary. Mary confessed that she could not have children and did not have a desire to get married, but she loved children and wanted to at least witness their birth, so she became an OBGYN nurse. I know it's presumptuous request, but I would like to raise a child with you. Can I help you until you're settled in your life? I was very grateful for Mary's offer and gladly accepted. While my child was small, I decided to live at Mary's place. When I asked her why she helped me, she told me that I had protected her when she was teased a long time ago. When I said I didn't remember that, Mary laughed and said that was the good part about me. My father, who had made a nonsensical excuse when he learned the truth, was promptly cut off. About 2 months later, he sprained his ankle falling down some stairs. He called me asking to take care of him because he couldn't move, but I hung up after saying, "We have cut ties." Although parenting was overwhelming, I decided to live my life to the fullest while protecting my daughter.